So we've talked a little bit about war crimes and sovereignty and the importance there of it, and I thought we'd tie it together with a couple vignettes that I've picked up. Now, these are my thoughts, not USCAPOC, not the U.S. Army, not the U.S. government. These are Colonel Lincoln S. Farish's thoughts. Let's get into it. 12 December 2023, the USS Carney and commercial vessels were transiting the Strait of Hormuz and were attacked by Houthi rebels. So, what exactly is that activity? And is it a war crime, crime against humanity, or crimes against peace? The first question we have to ask is, what was the crime and who did it? So the crime would be attacking shipping in international waters. So they attacked a ship in international waters. Question becomes, are the Houthi rebels sovereign? Do they have UN representation? Are they recognized by other countries? Do they coin money or create passports? And the answer is no, they don't do any of that. However, they do occupy territory in the middle of a contested civil war. So you could make the argument that they're de facto sovereign-ish. Definitely not de jure sovereign, but they're de facto sovereign. All right, so shooting ships in international waters, would that be a crime against peace? No. People who provided the material and means to shoot on commercial vessels in international waters, that could be considered a crime against peace if the people who did it were working with a sovereign government. Again, sovereignty matters, and understanding why sovereignty matters helps you understand the difference between a regular crime and a crime against humanity. So, crime against humanity, to get into that, would require a sovereign nation to have agents of that sovereign nation commit specific crimes like wanton murder or kidnapping against other people as a policy of that sovereign nation. Okay, so it's if the Houthi rebels put out death to all redheads and they started shooting redheads and the Houthi rebels were sovereign, that could be a crime against humanity. If the Houthi rebels were not sovereign, then it would just be criminal activity. Now, if the Houthi rebels were a sovereign nation and were at war and fighting a war across a border and started wantonly shooting civilians, that would be a war crime. But again, this does not matter because the Houthi rebels are not sovereign, at least with the vignette we have, without a serious stretch of what is or is not sovereign. So far, just criminal activity. But what kind of criminal activity? One other question we could say, once you shoot at another nation's war vessels, some people might say that's an act of war. And generally, if we started shooting up the Jamaican Navy, the Jamaicans would have a good case that we've committed an act of war. But here's the thing. Jamaica's sovereign. The United States is sovereign. The Houthi rebels are not sovereign. An act of war is an act by one nation intended to initiate or provoke a war with another nation. The Houthi rebels, who are not considered a nation state, shooting at commercial shipping is piracy. Shooting at the USS Carney could also be considered piracy, but definitely not an act of war. Second vignette. On 7 October 2023, the Palestinian militant group Hamas launched an assault on Israel. About 1,200 people were killed, and the Israeli military says more than 200 soldiers and civilians, including women and children, were taken to Gaza as hostages. This was reported by the BBC. For the purposes of this vignette, we are going to say that this is an accurate depiction of what happened. So again, the first question, are the Palestinians sovereign? Are they a nation state? Do they have UN representation? Yes. Are they recognized by other countries? 138. Do they create passports? Also yes. They do not, however, coin money. So they're pretty sovereign, pretty de facto de jure sovereignty. Okay? The Palestinian Authority, the head of government is Prime Minister Mohammed Sheriviz since 2006. President Abbas, who's also chairman of the PLO, is a general commander of the Fatah movement, which runs Jerusalem. It did run the Gaza Strip, but there's a little bit of a fight between Fatah and Hamas. Hamas came out on top and has taken over as the government as well as the military and all other services. So, in Gaza, Hamas acts as a sovereign entity, and Gaza is considered a sovereign nation state, more or less. So, if we take the assumption that what the BBC reported was accurate, and we go with the assumption that Hamas is a sovereign entity residing within Gaza, their actions could be considered, once adjudicated, to be crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the people who assisted with the attack committed crimes against peace. Now, the important question we have is, was the attack an act of war? Because that determines whether or not it was a crime against humanity or a war crime. Now, technically, Hamas and Israel were in a ceasefire. So there was already an act of war. So it could be considered a war crime. But if for some reason it was decided, either by the ICC, Israel, or some other party, that the attack was not in fact a war crime, or there was not an act of war going on, kidnapping of people, forcibly relocating people, and shooting civilians is generally seen as a crime against humanity, provided a sovereign nation, the agents of a sovereign nation, are carrying out the wishes of the sovereign nation. Okay? So again, if the Farish irregulars run across the border into Canada and shoot a bunch of Canadians, that's just regular criminal behavior. If the U.S. government says, hey, Farish irregulars, go across the border, shoot a bunch of Canadians, that would probably be a crime against humanity. If Canada and America were in the middle of a war and the U.S. government said, hey, Farish irregulars, go across the border and shoot a bunch of Canadians, that would in fact be a war crime. The first and most important criteria is sovereignty. That's why we have to understand it and know so much about it. Then you start getting into what was actually done. Were the entities who did it sovereign? Was it actual policy or just random criminals doing bad stuff? And what was actually done? So the categories, the perpetrators, and the conditions all have to be taken into account. Got your references here. If you want to double check and make sure that I didn't make any mistakes, feel free. All right, war crimes. Crimes against humanity, crimes against peace. The first and most important requirement, conducted by a sovereign government, agents of a sovereign government. So if you don't have sovereignty, you're just criminals doing criminal stuff. If you have sovereignty and it is the policy of the government and agents of that government acting in accordance with that policy commit intolerable acts, then you can start to have either a war crime or a crime against humanity. If they're at war, those actions would then be a war crime. If they are not at war, it would be a crime against humanity. And of course, industrialists or other people who are supporting material, equipment, or anything else to commit either crimes against humanity or war crimes, those folks can also be held to account for crimes against peace. As always, if you have any questions or you disagree, feel free to leave me a note below or send me an email direct.